TYVASO DPI leverages innovative device design for efficient drug delivery to the distal airways with just one breath. It is the only inhaled treprostinil delivered via a low-effort and low-flow inhaler. It's as easy as open, load, and inhale. Let's take a look inside TYVASO DPI to see how its unique design disperses treprostinil evenly and early in the inhalation. TYVASO DPI uses single-use, pre-filled powder cartridges for ease of higher titration with no maximum dose. After loading the cartridge, a low inspiratory effort is all that's needed, with a patient taking a normal, deep breath. Powder disperses early in the first 0.5 seconds of inhalation, allowing for administration in just one breath. As the powder moves up into the TYVASO DPI mouthpiece for dispersion, an expansion point slows it down. This innovative design results in a low flow rate of approximately 20 liters per minute to efficiently deliver treprostinil to the distal airways, the site of disease. In the lungs, optimally sized particles are being delivered to the distal airways at a low flow rate, which promotes deep lung deposition. The optimal size for pulmonary deposition is 1 to 5 micrometers. The median size of the TYVASO DPI particles is 2.6 micrometers, which is right within the optimal size range. Let's review some key takeaways to remember about TYVASO DPI. First, that TYVASO DPI is a low-effort inhaler designed to disperse medication in the first 0.5 seconds to allow for administration in just one breath. Next, that TYVASO DPI delivers medication to the distal airways using a low flow rate of 20 liters per minute. And finally, TYVASO DPI particles are optimally sized to promote deep lung deposition. To learn more about how TYVASO DPI offers efficient, discrete drug delivery made easy, visit www.tyvasohcp.com/DPI.
Important safety information. Indication: TYVASO, treprostinil inhalation solution, and TYVASO DPI, treprostinil inhalation powder, are prostacyclin mimetics indicated for the treatment of pulmonary arterial hypertension, PAH-WHO Group 1, to improve exercise ability. Studies with TYVASO establishing effectiveness predominantly included patients with NYHA functional class 3 symptoms and etiologies of idiopathic or heritable PAH, 56%, or PAH associated with connective tissue diseases, 33%. The effects diminish over the minimum recommended dosing interval of 4 hours. Treatment timing can be adjusted for planned activities. While there are long-term data on use of treprostinil by other routes of administration, nearly all clinical experience with inhaled treprostinil has been on a background of an endothelin receptor antagonist, ERA, and/or a phosphodiesterase type 5 PDE5 inhibitor. The controlled clinical experience with TYVASO was limited to 12 weeks in duration. Pulmonary hypertension associated with interstitial lung disease, PH-ILD, WHO Group 3, to improve exercise ability. The study with TYVASO establishing effectiveness predominantly included patients with etiologies of idiopathic interstitial pneumonia, IIP 45%, inclusive of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, IPF, combined pulmonary fibrosis and emphysema, CPFE 25%, and WHO Group 3 connective tissue disease 22%. Important safety information, warnings, and precautions. TYVASO and TYVASO DPI are pulmonary and systemic vasodilators. In patients with low systemic arterial pressure, either product may produce symptomatic hypotension. Both products inhibit platelet aggregation and increase the risk of bleeding. Co-administration of a cytochrome P450 CYP2C8 enzyme inhibitor, for example gemfibrozil, may increase exposure, both Cmax and AUC, to treprostinil. Co-administration of a CYP2C8 enzyme inducer, for example rifampin, may decrease exposure to treprostinil. Increased exposure is likely to increase adverse events associated with treprostinil administration, whereas decreased exposure is likely to reduce clinical effectiveness. Like other inhaled prostaglandins, TYVASO and TYVASO DPI may cause acute bronchospasm. Patients with asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, or other bronchial hyperreactivity are at increased risk for bronchospasm. Ensure that such patients are treated optimally for reactive airway disease prior to and during treatment with TYVASO and TYVASO DPI. Drug interactions, specific populations. The concomitant use of either product with diuretics, antihypertensives, or other vasodilators may increase the risk of symptomatic hypotension. Human pharmacokinetic studies with an oral formulation of treprostinil diolamine, indicated that co-administration of the cytochrome P450, CYP2C8 enzyme inhibitor gemfibrozil, increases exposure, both Cmax and AUC, to treprostinil. Co-administration of the CYP2C8 enzyme inducer rifampin decreases exposure to treprostinil. It is unclear if the safety and efficacy of treprostinil by the inhalation route are altered by inhibitors or inducers of CYP2C8. Limited case reports of treprostinil use in pregnant women are insufficient to inform a drug-associated risk of adverse developmental outcomes. However, pulmonary arterial hypertension is associated with an increased risk of maternal and fetal mortality. There are no data on the presence of treprostinil in human milk, the effects on the breastfed infant, or the effects on milk production. Safety and effectiveness in pediatric patients have not been established. Across clinical studies used to establish the effectiveness of TYVASO in patients with PAH and PH-ILD, 268, 47.8%, patients aged 65 years and over were enrolled. The treatment effects and safety profile observed in geriatric patients were similar to younger patients. In general, dose selection for an elderly patient should be cautious, reflecting the greater frequency of hepatic, renal, or cardiac dysfunction, and of concomitant diseases or other drug therapy. Adverse reactions. Pulmonary arterial hypertension, WHO Group 1. In a 12-week placebo-controlled study, TRIUMPH 1, of 235 patients with PAH, WHO Group 1, and nearly all NYHA functional class 3. The most common adverse reactions seen with TYVASO in 4% and more of PAH patients, and more than 3% greater than placebo, were cough, 54% versus 29%, headache, 41% versus 23%, throat irritation, pharyngolaryngeal pain, 25% versus 14%, nausea, 19% versus 11%, flushing, 15% versus less than 1%, and syncope, 6% versus less than 1%. In addition, adverse reactions occurring in 4% and more of patients were dizziness and diarrhea. In a 3-week open-label, single-sequence safety and tolerability study, BREEZE, conducted in 51 patients on stable doses of TYVASO, who switched to a corresponding dose of TYVASO DPI, the most commonly reported adverse events seen with TYVASO DPI in 4% and more of PAH patients during the 3-week treatment phase included cough, 35.3%, headache, 15.7%, dyspnea, 7.8%, and nausea, 5.9%. Pulmonary hypertension associated with ILD, WHO Group 3. In a 16-week placebo-controlled study, INCREASE, of 326 patients with PH-ILD, WHO Group 3, adverse reactions with TYVASO were similar to the experience in studies of PAH. Please see full prescribing information for TYVASO or TYVASO DPI, instructions for use manuals for TD100 and TD300 TYVASO inhalation system and TYVASO DPI inhalation powder, and additional information at www.tyvasohcp.com or call 1-844-UNITHER, 1-844-864-8437.